people call in?
Sometimes.
I don't think we're going to have it on today, are we?
No. No, I don't want Kevin Lewis calling in.
So what do I need to do here?
Headphones?
In that case. And this mic's okay?
Uh,
You'll want to bring it up a little bit.
it's pretty stiff, so you have to kind of maintain it. There you go.
I can probably make that work.
And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment from very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Tuesday, Thanksgiving Turkey Day week. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined today in the studio by none other than Representative Emeritus, former Representative Mark Jennings. Mark, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you guys.
Well, we're glad you could take some time to sit in the studio with us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, we're glad to see you here. A lot to do on today's program. Of course, we are going to have a conversation about the top 10 worst things in Governor Mark Gordon's budget. And to say that there's only 10 of them is a gigantic understatement. But we're going to talk about some of the more egregious ones. And, of course, we're just beginning to dive into all of your money that the governor wants to spend. And it is a tremendous amount. As I noted on the podcast last week, to do the exact same thing that we did last year, which is, 2 schools, a whole bunch of other spending, it's actually going to it would cost less this time around.
What we did last year was spend too damn much.
Yes, we did. And so the budget left the House last year at roughly $9 billion. By the time it got to the Senate, they added $2 billion, which includes those 2 schools on there. And as we've told you repeatedly on the show, the way that a budget is crafted in Wyoming is you have the budget book. And the very first column says, all right, what did you spend last year? The second column essentially says, what would it take to do the same thing you did last year this time around? And, most of the time prices go up. But in this case, actually, it would cost us around $1.9 billion less than we spent last year. Now, in the new budget, the governor wants to add an additional $2 billion on top of that. So we started with outrageous spending, and now the governor wants to add another $2 billion on top of it.
Don't think that he's done, though.
Oh, no.
I could find all the right buttons. I lost 2 cameras. If he holds true to form, there will be a bunch of letters put out between now and the beginning of the budget session that will add onto it as well. So
Yeah,
A lot of fun.
it's going to be a ton of fun, and I'm sure, Mark, I'm sure you'll have plenty to say when we start getting into this.
I look forward to it.
There's a bunch of stuff. Also on today's program, Josh Durrell from the Wyoming Business Council is coming back on the show. He's got some new polling out that he thinks is fantastic, and so we're going to talk to him about that. And well, we don't exactly know how that's going to turn out, but anyway, at the top of the hour, Josh is going to join us. But I want to begin this morning with just a general question. I have the illustrious Agent 29 representative of the Wyoming legislature.
Who did find the camera again?
Good.
Yes.
I'm glad you did. And it's working. I'm amazed. And I have a longtime representative. So this ought to be a pretty easy question for you, too. There's an editorial in the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, and they ask this question. When should the government give business a boost? What do you guys think, Mark?
When should they give them a boost?
Yes, that's what they ask.
I didn't know the government was supposed to be in that business.
Well, they're not. But according to the Turkey Vulture, this is all about affordable housing, which has been a bit of a controversy as of late with the work that our pal Rebecca Bexdell, and which, by the way, Rebecca is a sponsor of the program. And if you want to move the heck out of Jackson because you've mistakenly thought that you moved to Wyoming, and you actually do want to move to Wyoming, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. But she's been doing a lot of work with all this affordable housing.
Was that a freebie?
That was a freebie right there.
I want my cut.
Yeah, well, okay.
You just got it.
You just got it. But she's been doing a lot of work on exposing what I think is a giant scam with all of this affordable housing. And but the city of Cheyenne, they're doing something entirely different. They're using what is called a TIF, a tax increment financing. And essentially what they're doing is they're borrowing money based on future tax revenues. And they're claiming that this is going to make sure that we have enough revenue to pay for all of these affordable housing boondoggles. But the problem is that if you are basing your financing off of future tax revenues, that means those tax revenues can't go down. Because if they did, well, then it would cost you more money, right?
It also means you can't use those tax revenues for something else should the need arise.
Well, what other
They've already
need?
pledged.
What could possibly ever come up more important than affordable
I
housing?
think there is another word for that. It's called scam.
It is definitely a scam, and we're seeing a lot of these across the
Yeah.
state. In fact, there are housing developments that are pretty much in every county. I mean, there's a couple of exceptions. And most of them are not paying property taxes. And so, I think they meet the very definition of the word scam. So first, guys, is it ever appropriate that government give private business a boost?
I'm going to give my long-term answer that I'm fairly well known for, and it will. I'll try and pontificate as little as possible.
Okay. All right.
No.
Not even no, but heck
No.
no.
Heck no.
Still no.
Still no.
You stole my thunder.
Well,
Told you I was going to pontificate a little there.
but guys, I mean, I understand that the conservative response to that question is almost always no. But there are a lot of different places where we're shelling out huge amounts of cash to, for this so-called public-private partnership here or this business effort there. I mean, there's a couple of them in the governor's budget that we're going to talk about today. So, I mean, I guess two questions since we're talking about affordable housing. One, do we have a problem with that? And two, the Wyoming Constitution says that the only place that we can give public money is necessary support for the poor, and presumably, if you don't have a place to live, that kind of makes you poor. So, I mean, doesn't the government? I already know the answer to this question, but doesn't the government have some sort of place there?
Well, for me personally, I look at that and I think that's one of the few places in our Wyoming Constitution that they didn't pay attention to history. That we've tried that before where government gets involved. I think there's a famous quote, you probably, David, can tell me who I'm quoting, that it's make no mistake, we intend to be benevolent dictators. But make no mistake, we intend to be dictators.
Yes. I can't remember who that is,
Yeah.
but I remember the quotation.
And the problem is that we've been down this road before. Not as much with housing. I don't know where we shifted over to housing, that we thought we should try and usurp the free market. Wherever it was a very poor idea. I suspect some blue state.
Probably.
But it is not, even in aid of the poor, it is not the government's place to take money from you or I and redistribute it amongst even the poor. And in our Wyoming Constitution, that's one of the things that I think I would like to see us at least go back and adhere to the direct wording. But I'm not sure that we should. I mean, if you look at history, every time government gets involved in that benevolence, picking winners and losers, it always messes it up. And so there is a place to help the poor. It's called your local church. It's called nonprofits that are making the case to the public inside the free market. They'll take care of that. In perfection, no. That's not till the good Lord returns. But I would just argue that it's not government's place, and especially not housing.
Well, Ken, I mean, the same question to you. I mean, the Wyoming Constitution says necessary support for the poor. And I mean, if you got a bunch of people that can't afford to live in a place, I mean, is that not supporting the poor?
Two things. Thanks, Mark, for mentioning the church.
You're welcome.
Because if somebody goes to the church for help, there's a possibility that we can actually get to the issue as to why they're poor. And so there is at least a little bit of hope, besides the fact that God told us that's how to do things. But look at Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And I
Not
just read
so
an article
affordable.
yesterday that said Wyoming has the highest increase in insurance costs. I mean, it's astronomically insane. And the whole idea was to try to get everybody to have, well, it wasn't the real idea. The pretend idea was to make sure that everybody was insured. And so they have just created a mess that the only thing big enough they think to get them out of is government. What we have to do is not quit making the same mistake. We have to start backtracking. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of months, is taking a good hard look at our Department of Health and saying more money is not going to help. It's only going to make it worse.
Well, when we were down in Torrington, I had a nice conversation with a developer, I guess you would call him, from Gillette. And he told me that he built an apartment building in Gillette, and it's all private funding. And, that's his business, is to, provide housing. And he said that he put the rent rates just a little bit below the average in Gillette. And he said, he's able to provide housing for, several different people. It's not like one of these huge blue line development outfits, but it's a small building. And he said the biggest problem he has is competing with government. Yeah. That there's no way that he can put up a building and provide housing cheaper than the government can. Because, if you have government, and I think this is probably the biggest argument that we conservatives would make, that private business cannot compete with an outfit that has an unlimited checkbook. And it's wrong to make a private businessman compete with government. But therein lies the problem. We throw public money at these housing projects, and because there's an unlimited supply of money, we can raise the rates however far we want, and we can build them as big and as immaculate as we want. And
It's more insidious than that, because his wallet is helping fund his competition.
yes,
And so where else do we think that that's okay?
well, we don't. Yeah. And it's there's that classic example that I introduced my audience to. Oh man, I guess it must have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But a guy in Buffalo that owns a gym, paid for it with all his own money. It's actually a pretty nice place, one of those 24-hour type deals. And the city of Buffalo wanted to give a whole boatload of money to the YMCA to improve their gym. And the argument was, why should he pay taxes to compete with government? Spend, like you said, Mark, spend your money so that government can compete against you. I mean, it's absolutely
So
ridiculous.
the government can put you out of business most of the time.
Well, and that's what's happening across the state.
Yeah.
If there's the reason why you don't see private housing developments is government's already doing that. So, I mean, really, there's no money to be made there.
Or they're laundering it through nonprofits.
Yeah, that's another big thing. What do you think about this, Ken?
You don't want to know what I think. I can't say it on the air.
Well, you can. You just may not get reelected.
We're going to have Josh Durrell in here a little bit, and his entire industry is that's the problem. Is government cannot stand meddling. If you leave government where it's supposed to be, you fix the roads, you provide some police and fire, the basic elements, and then go away. The free market has always worked. Free market will always work, but you have to allow it to work. Now, Josh's argument, and he'll probably make it while he's here, Josh's argument is there isn't a free market anymore. We've messed it up. And so what do? Do you turn to the people that messed it up and say, mess it up some more and that'll fix it? Or do you take a turn back from where you were, reduce government to where it needs to be? And that's what needs to happen. And the only chance that we've got, and it's a slim one, is to be able to retain, good conservatives in the House, populate the Senate, get the governorship back, and be able to tell the feds to get out of town.
Well, his argument is the classic one that we use. How do you get somebody out of a hole that they've dug themselves? Well, you tell them to stop digging, and then you help them up out of there. But there's this idea in government that, well, we're too invested in it. We've invested too much money in this failed project, and so we can't get rid of it. We just have to continue.
Yeah, think about the rail lines in California.
Yeah, high-speed rail.
Yeah.
By the way, is that one from Cheyenne to Denver still on the books, or have we done away with that one?
Well, it's done away with for now. Have you heard anything more about it?
I have not.
No, it's done away with for now, but it'll come back. I remember in the 70s they were talking about doing that sort of thing. They wanted to run a rail line all the way to Sheridan so you could jump on the train here and ride to Denver, which you could kind of. There used
Kind
to
of.
be passenger trains.
Well,
And if this is another thing, if the free market couldn't do it,
then government can't.
then what makes you think government's going to be successful?
Well, exactly right.
I would think that they should at least go to Acme. There's some people up there we should pick up too.
There's actually, and for those of you who are not from around Sheridan, there actually is a little town called Acme.
Used to be.
Used to be.
Yeah, they make anvils and rockets.
They do. Their biggest customer is a coyote. Yeah. But right now, the only thing that's in Acme is Ramaco, and that's another topic we'll talk about at another time. Now, really, Mark, the reason I wanted to have you on this morning is the governor has released his budget, and there's a whole bunch of things in there that we might say are big, giant wastes of money. Now, when you were in the legislature, I remember distinctly one of the things that you complained about a lot was the governor's slush fund, and there's probably a couple of those. But if you could describe for my audience what you mean by the governor's slush fund.
It was called coffee cans, and actually, I believe it was Speaker Harshman that talked about how many of those that they had. At one point, it was 600 and some, or
That's probably a pretty good number.
yeah,
Yeah, we usually say 700.
700. Now it's gone up naturally, and it's money that they set aside, and it does several things. They can come back and grab into that without as much notice. But it also builds funds into those coffee cans that they, if they wish to do a project and they have done the spider web thing from one coffee can to another, when this one makes X of dollars, it tips over into another coffee can, which then tips into, pretty soon the people lose track of that. It's the craziest thing. A state, 580,000 people, I don't know, we should have a special deal of QuickBooks or something, and anyone ought to be able to look that up. And there ought to be like basically an in fund and an expenditure fund. And instead, they use these coffee cans as slush funds so that they can fund their projects without near as much oversight.
And an important point here that I don't want to get lost is that a lot of these coffee cans, and really what they are is trust funds, but a lot of these coffee cans, they tip into each other, and so one, they're, I don't know, a trust fund is set up for, and I'm just making this number up, but $20 million. Well, when that trust fund gets above $20 million, the excess dumps into this trust fund over here. And when the same thing happens to that trust fund, it dumps in over here. And what you end up with is a giant Gordian knot that if you pull on one string, you have no idea what it's going to affect. And it's one of the reasons why we have such a hard time unraveling the budget.
It's a giant Rube Goldberg contraption, and it's meant to be confusing. But it's a little more insidious than that. You might remember at one point I was bringing a bill on the House floor to get rid of the SIPA.
Yes.
The main reason, quite frankly, and I should have said it that day, I chose to just remain silent. But they were all throwing a fit about how you don't know what this bill or what you're doing. You don't know what the SIPA actually does. Yes, I know what the SIPA does. The SIPA allows the governor to dip in and move money around at will and leave the legislature out of it. Therefore, we need to close that damned account.
Yeah.
And we need to rein in control again. The legislature has ceded control of its agencies to the executive branch in that we allow them to make all of our rules for us. We don't have time to deal with that, so you just go out and you make all the rules.
And we'll rubber stamp them.
Yeah, and we'll go back and check them. Yeah, right.
So so SIPA, just so we're clear, that's the strategic investments for. I mean, it is another one of these slush funds, but just do we remember what the acronym is on it?
I don't remember exactly. It doesn't matter. What it is it's a kind of a checking savings account. So they've got it in layers where you got a checking account, you got a checking savings account, you got a savings account, and you got a trust fund.
It's really a good way of hiding money of what you want to do with it. Ken,
That's
on
the
appropriations, because you can take money that has sideboards on it, what you can spend it, and when it tips, like what you were talking about, maybe they tip it over into a fund that then the governor's the only one that has the say over it, or maybe the sideboards on it are far more relaxed, or maybe they're more stringent because they want to do a specific project out of that. There could be a place where they tip that and wish to do that sort of thing.
One of their projects is, frankly, saving and investing. We've got enough cash to run Wyoming for 6 years. Now, we can't touch it because statutorily we've put it away where we can't touch it. We got $32 billion. So how much is enough? And show me in the state constitution where it is the responsibility of government to accumulate wealth and power and influence. I don't think that's the right thing. They excuse it by saying, okay, but the money that we make off of all of these investments pays your taxes.
Yeah.
So now we've got that Troy's self-licking ice cream cone. You got a machine that perpetuates itself. What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Well, I'm about to tell you what could possibly go wrong. So we're going to take, it's a little bit early, but we're going to take our first break. And when we come back, we're going to hit those really terrible things that are in the governor's budget. So we'll do that next. Are you tired of all the meaningless political drivel floating around right now? Endless commentary that really doesn't have anything backing it up? Do you long for the days of true investigative journalism coming from an authoritative source who really doesn't care how popular and apparently good-looking a politician is? Fortunately for you, that's what I do on Cowboy State Politics. New episodes are published every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, and you can get them anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There, you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles I might bring up during the course of the program. Cowboy State Politics Live, the program you're listening to right now, is broadcast every Tuesday through Friday, beginning at 8 a.m. Pay attention to all of that other block-headed nonsense if you want. Just make sure that you don't miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on a Tuesday, Thanksgiving week. Welcome back to the show. I am your illustrious host, David Iverson, doing what I was born to do each and every day with talent given to me by God himself.
So what are we doing?
Well, you were
And where does our talent come from? I always
God
wondered.
himself as well. Yeah. Yeah,
I think he's playing a trick on me, Dave. I think he moved all the camera buttons.
I
to different
probably did.
places.
Anyway, welcome to the program. We've got former Representative Mark Jennings in the studio with us. It's been a while since he's been on the program. So before we went to the break, we were talking about the $32 billion that we have stashed away. And to be fair, it's in various trust funds, and a lot of it, like Ken mentioned, statutorily, we can't touch. But if you do the math on that, that's $20,000. It's actually like $19,000 and change for every man, woman, and child in this entire state. 20 grand a pop that's sitting in the bank. And it's, that is an extraordinary amount of money. And if you, and again, if you do the math, that means we could run where we're at right now budgetarily. We could run the entire state for 3 years and not bring in another. Ken says 6. I was being generous with 3 years, but the governor wants to add more. And Ken, go ahead and put this up on the screen so everybody can see it. Let's see from current slide. So these are just a couple of items that we cherry-picked out of the governor's budget. You got $112.5 million from general funds, and you can see there's several different things that they want to do there with it. There's $12.3 million to a quote-unquote offender management system. I cannot wait to get Mark's response to that one. 8.1 for the Wyoming Stable Token. That thing just seems to be more expensive.
I think there must be a misprint on there. It's a computer program to rack inmates and parolees.
Oh, yeah. It
now
means
I
track.
might vote for this if it turned out to be.
I was typing in a hurry. There.
I'm not there to vote.
It's
folks.
fixed. Okay. You got to hold me accountable, too.
I just thought, I think it was a Freudian slip.
It could have been. I would totally be in favor of just keeping them in the big house.
I just want you to define rack. I mean, do we put them?
Large
Do we put
tracts
them
of
in
land.
stocks, or do we put them on a mail bicycle with no seat? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, it could be a lot of interpretation.
It could be. So if you look down at the bottom of the screen there, it says $6.6 million to Wyoming Public TV. That one's interesting. Another $6 million for the UW Athletics. I wonder how much money they have stashed away.
That's an interesting one because it has to do with the NCAA lawsuit.
Yeah. I can't wait to talk about that one. And then last on the list is another $5 million for the Wyoming Business Council for quote unquote business research. So let's go all the way back up to the top, guys, and let's just kind of talk about these. So first one, $64.1 million to state employees in the executive branch, and that's an average 9% raise. So, Mark, talk to me about the wages of state employees.
Earlier on in my life, you did not work for the state because of high pay. You worked for the benefits. And somewhere along the line, they decided that wasn't good enough, so they want their cake and eat it too. Listen, they have gotten a raise. I was in the legislature for 10 years, and I actually don't know of a year where they didn't get some form of raises. And that's not the case out in the free market. I mean, times are going well. Yes, there's been some increases, but well, frankly, it's way out of control. How much? 9%?
It's a huge number.
That's just crazy.
And I think it's important to point out here that that doesn't mean that everybody is getting a 9% raise. That's the average.
Yeah.
And at $64.1 million, there's an awful lot of state employees that are going to get a bump in pay. And I know I've mentioned this statistic before on the program, but for every 10,000 Wyoming citizens, we have about 800 state employees.
And a few years back, that number was closer to 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And it has grown that much, and each one of those are now going to get an almost 10% raise.
And that's on
Average.
top. Yeah, that's on top of the raise that they got last year. And I don't remember what that dollar number is. But I think the important point here is who in
Success.
So, yeah.
That's what they wanted, is they wanted you to forget how that stacks up.
Well, that, and and I pointed this out on the podcast too, that if you look at the Wyoming budget since 2020, so before COVID, we have more than doubled the size of the Wyoming budget in 4 or 5 short years.
When I started in 15, I believe it was 4.5. And I actually voted for a budget one year because they cut.
What?
They
No, not you.
I did one time out of 10 years because they cut 400 and some odd million. But in the rest of the time, it has just gone. And they do that in a number of ways. Ken's on appropriations, so I'm sure he'll appreciate how they have fudged those numbers. They say the budget went down off of general fund. They'll take somebody off of general fund, but they give them their own revenue stream. So the funding didn't go down; it actually went up.
Well, and that's an excellent point that you bring up, because a lot of Wyoming's government is not on the budget. It's not in general funds. We've set up a number of different trust funds, and so they get removed out of the budget process. And a lot of these agencies don't even have to come before you guys on appropriations. But one of the biggest ones is the Game and Fish. They don't have to come to the legislature and ask for money.
And YDOT.
And YDOT, it's another, which, interesting, they're still short $400 million, but they're still working.
Yeah, with where YDOT's concerned specifically, there is a segment of their budget that comes from us, and they come to that, but we don't see their whole budget.
No. All right, so let's go down the list here. $700,000 to the Wyoming Business Council, and this is only one of the items that the Business Council is going to get. But in this section of the budget, we're going to shell out another $700,000. Now, this is a fact that Josh Durrell or anybody at the Business Council can't get away from. That in the entire existence of the Wyoming Business Council, we've dumped hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions into that program, and Wyoming's GDP has actually gone down. I mean, the whole reason for their existence is to increase our GDP, and it's actually gone down. And if you go back to the last interview we did with Mr. Durrell, he admits it. He says, "Yeah, well, it's there's a lot of different forces that affect that, but really, we're doing a great job."
We don't have the correct formula of socialism yet.
Yeah. All right. So what do you think about this one, guys? $200,000 to Wyoming PBS. Now, first, why are we funding the public broadcasting system? And I thought this was one of the things that Trump was going to handle.
They just ran a fluff piece on John Bear.
I wonder why they did that.
Yeah. They've heard rumors we're going to defund them. The feds already did. And so this money that they're asking for is to have the state pay for what the feds are no longer paying for. This is a rude awakening there coming for them. So they did a fluff piece on the chairman of appropriations right before we have our, our first get together.
Yeah, that wasn't strategic at all. How about this one? $27.7 million to the University of Wyoming that the governor can just kind of give to him.
That the UW trust fund, I believe, is already pushing it. Ken can probably help. It's probably already over $1 billion. They already have that
Their
kind
endowment.
of endowments.
Yeah, yeah. And I think when you do the math, they could easily pay for their entire student body to go to school
Tuition free.
tuition free, and it would be no problem. They could probably do it for
Yeah,
multiple years
yeah.
too. All right, now here's the main question I wanted to get into with you. When you look at the governor's budget recommendations, you hear this phrase, "Well, bring them up to the current market or the market rate," and all of these are just based on the market. Now, wait a minute. This is government. How can government have anything to do with the market?
They shouldn't.
I don't
That's the
think
real
they
answer.
do.
When you're talking to bringing them up to market, which one is it that you're reading?
This is all the salaries.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What is the market rate for government?
Well, see, and that's just the point, that we have actually created a quote unquote market for government.
Well, what they're saying is the competition against the other 49 other states.
Yes.
And really, we don't live in New York, thank God.
we can't own guns in New York, so
Yeah. And so why in the world do we place ourselves on, I mean, it's crazy to even think that you're going to create the government on the backs of the people or marketplace.
right. And it's this fallacy in the legislature, and it probably happens in all legislatures, that we have to pay our government employees the same as other states. Well, frankly, what they're doing in Colorado doesn't have any impact on what's happening here in Wyoming.
I thought that was the People's Republic of.
It is the People's Republic of Colorado. I was being generous. But that's what they do. They say,
And so are they.
yeah, they say that government employees in these other states are making this, and therefore we should pay our employees the same. But that doesn't take into account, the cost of living here, the taxes, or any of that. And second, we really have we've made government into its own market, because the number one industry in Wyoming, and this is a mind-blowing thing when I first figured it out. But the number one industry in Wyoming is not extraction of our resources. It's not tourism. It's not hunting. It's not any of those things. The number one industry in Wyoming is government. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question, guys, is, have we created a market for government?
We've created a monster.
Fair
That's
enough.
for sure.
All right. So let's Ken, you got something on that one?
No, I just part of the issue. I can't think and push buttons at the same time. I've proven that. Part of the issue is that they're talking about is we get somebody trained up and then they go off and work in the private sector. I see that as a bonus.
I think that's absolutely
that
good.
means we have taken them, instead of being a leech on the economy, now they're actually producing something. So I see that as a good thing. They see that as a problem. We want to be able to keep and maintain good health, and good help. And what it comes down to is we're trying to do far too much. And if you look at the very basic things that government should do, they're not complicated.
No, and there's only a few of them. But our state government, I mean, we have expanded to a point where government handles everything. I mean, the state of Wyoming is involved in just about everything. Healthcare, our education system is huge.
Our education system alone is going to break us if we're not careful.
Well, explain that. Expound on that, Mark.
Well, the amount of budget and Ken's and appropriations, theirs is already above half of all the money that we take in. Is that right?
If we keep spending the way we are right now, and I've raised this flag before, I think it's the year 29,
2029.
In 2029, the SFP, which is the school foundation program, the big savings account that we pay for school, is upside down by almost a couple hundred million. And that's if nothing changes. And we know things are going to change. The point is, we're spending at an unsustainable rate. We can't possibly keep up doing what we're doing. I believe that the other side wants to do this because they have their eye on an income tax.
Absolutely,
My
they do.
very first campaign signs and things that I said was no income tax. But that's what they're doing. They're saying, look at how hard they screamed when we cut property taxes just a tiny bit. Oh, we don't have enough to do what we have to do. All of our necessary functions. We can't have Christmas lights in Casper now because you bastages in the legislature cut our funding.
I thought that's what the little stoplights were, red and blue, or red and
Okay.
green.
All right. So now we hear this a lot that in Wyoming, if you don't want to get reelected, there's two things that you do. One, you come out against guns. And the second one is that you advocate for an income tax. Now, there's kind of this big lie and shine. Well, nobody down here really wants an income tax. In fact, in the, I think it was the Revenue Committee, one of the conservatives, it was Jamie Lean. She made a point to say, now, I just want to be really clear. Nobody here is in favor of an income tax. Really? Nancy Case is actually on that committee. Yeah. And why don't we just listen to this?
Remember, Senator Nancy Case is a conservative.
So I definitely believe that we need new taxes. We need to broaden the tax base in a way that becomes more sustainable for the Wyoming that we're going to have in the future.
More sustainable.
And it's not a good idea to spend every last dime in savings, because that savings doesn't even belong to us.
No, it's our money.
That represents a future for future Wyoming citizens based on the mineral wealth that we sold out, and they didn't get anything for it.
Oh, we didn't.
So I'm looking for new taxes. I'm looking for new taxes that follow what Wyoming's future economy is going to be.
Wait for
what
it.
we're going to sell.
Wait for it.
I think electricity taxes. We're going to be big exporters of electricity in the future. It's going to be produced differently. We need to focus on that kind of thing. We need to consider income taxes at the very high level, both at the corporate and the personal.
Okay, now to be fair, he said that a really long time ago. That was in the late 90s. He was part of a working group called Tax Reform 2000. And it was this big working group. Several different people around the state were involved in it. Mike Sullivan's brother was a part of it. Mark, you're the one that tipped me off on this Tax Reform 2000 business.
Yeah, it had come to a vote my very first year. They had all these things in place to begin going down the road he's asking about. And the conservatives, actually, they made a mistake. They put 5 conservatives on Revenue Committee, and we killed it in committee.
Well, that wasn't the end of it, though.
No, not at all.
Then it turned into Vision 2020, which was the exact same thing as their Tax Reform 2000. And now you have people like Nancy Case, Kale Case, that is still sitting on the Revenue Committee. So absolutely, they do want to increase, your taxes.
And David, I'd like to interject, and especially with Ken's view here, is because they can't just come straight out and get an income tax, because the way our founders wrote that into the Constitution, that all other taxes will be deductible. And so it's a wash for them to just do that. That's why they haven't done it yet. The legislature is allowed to do it. It's just that they have to work under those sideboards. So what I'm convinced that they are doing there is when funding falls below a certain amount, 500 million, if memory serves me correctly, it triggers a 30% across the board cut in education. And I think that's what they're trying to spend to. I think they're trying to spend it to the point where they spend it down, that cushion, that protection of 500 million gets breached, and that triggers a 30% cut. At the point that they have to live through a 30% cut, they will scream to the public, we must change the constitutional prohibition against the income tax, and they'll probably get it. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, the podcast from yesterday was all about Senator Kale Case, and I played those sound bites from him that he absolutely, and he's not alone. I mean,
No,
he's just
no.
the
More
stereotype,
vocal.
more vocal, stereotypic example. All right, let's get back to the governor's budget real quick, and this one I know you guys are going to love. $12.3 million for a quote offender management system. Now, this is a computer program to track inmates and parolees. I have so many questions. First one, which computer program in the world cost $12.3 million to write?
Clearly, they haven't talked to Google
Clearly, they have not. And, a question that, Ken, you had
or somebody.
when we were prepping this is how did we track inmates and parolees before without having this program?
There's also how many do we have? How much tracking do they need?
Right.
Don't we have guards?
I mean, how many
parolees?
inmates?
Parolees is different, but they have parole officers. And it, I, it, I'm really waiting to hear what it is that they're going to come up with as an explanation because I'm not buying it.
You guys should have Dan on your show and ask him,
Dan,
the head of corrections.
We should do that with Scott here.
yes, we absolutely should. All right, let's go for another one here. $8.1 million for the Wyoming Stable Token. Now, Ken, I was sitting in the gallery when I heard that all we need is $5 million. And actually, I think you were still in the legislature then, Mark. That all we need is $5 million, and that will be more than enough money to set up this Wyoming Stable Token. Why do we need another 8?
Why do we need a state-sponsored shooting complex?
Well,
we
wait a
don't.
minute. I can answer that one
all right. Since it came up, go ahead, Mark.
because I voted for that one, and to my own regrets to some degree. But on the other hand, what happened was that once again we took tourism off of the general fund because we allowed them to raise their hospitality tax, and I don't see why it's called hospitality because it doesn't seem very hospitable. And so in the first 18 months, they had a huge amount of surplus. And so they were spending that money into things like drag show for kids, and they were spending it on all kinds of just utter foolishness because we'd given them a revenue stream, not with my vote, but and so my vote for the gun thing was to siphon off $10 million from their $26 million surplus so that they couldn't continue spending on that. My hopes is that the legislature would turn around and hand that over to or sell it to a private entity. That was always my original intent. But it was to siphon that money off because it doesn't go back to general fund. It goes into their own revenue stream and they can spend it on whatever kind of utter foolishness that they want, and they are.
But as with all government items, it's no longer 10 million. Now it's
Yeah.
20.
I- You made that argument, and you convinced me to vote with you to vote for it. And one of the things I said to Senator Hicks was, I'll support this thing as long as we know that it's going to get turned over to private industry to go over. We're just kind of planting
Yeah.
the seed money. And then last year they asked for more money, and I was really between a rock and a hard place. And regretfully, I went ahead with the idea. So, we've come this far, that argument, but we need to get up this much and no more. Now they come back and ask for no.
And the interesting thing is, I don't believe they've pursued. NRA had a program that would match the funds. So if you had 5 million in, they would have matched it to where you could have gotten like 8-1. And so there never was a need for them ever to come back. When I made an inquiry into that, they were just oblivious to the deal that they would possibly even apply for that grant. And that was NRA. I mean, it was a good step to go towards something more private. They
Yeah.
didn't do it.
All right, well, let's get back to the budget. And Ken, if you could throw my screen back up there for just a second, I need to correct something real quick. So up at the top where it says 200 grand to Wyoming PBS, that should say Wyoming Public Radio. And the one at the bottom, which we're about to talk about right now, is that 6.6 million for Wyoming Public TV. Technically, those are two different items. One of them is Wyoming Public Radio. One of them, which is, if I'm not mistaken, is handled at the community college in
Casper.
well, it's at
It's in Riverton.
Riverton, and then the other one, Wyoming Public TV, is run out of the University of Wyoming. So kind of the same program, a little bit different. But this next one, $6.6 million for Wyoming Public TV, and it's at the university. Okay, so keep that in mind. And this is to restore lost revenue from federal cuts. And if I'm not mistaken, Ken, one of the arguments made for this is, well, that's part of the emergency broadcast system.
Yeah. So, yeah, the emergency broadcast system. So all three people who happen to be watching that particular broadcast will realize that we're in trouble.
Yes.
And the funny part about that is their entire neighborhood is already going to be empty because everybody else heard it on Facebook 4 hours ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a couple of things here. First, the federal, like the big beautiful bill, got rid of a lot of funding for Wyoming PBS, or for PBS in general, and that caused a revenue drop for Wyoming Public TV. So why is the state of Wyoming replacing money that was already cut from the federal government for a program that most people don't even pay any attention to?
I've been involved in voting against that, and I think as long as I was in the legislature, it just
Yeah.
unnecessary
I would say with
waste.
the current legislature there that their chances are not much more than a snowball.
Maybe a snowball today. All right, the next one, $6 million for UW athletics operating. Well, athletics, I mean, we have to have the Cowboys.
With $1 billion surplus or endowment. I'm sorry, endowment.
My question is, if UW athletics needs operating cash, why doesn't the Wyoming Cowboy Joe Club pitch in some?
This all stems from the lawsuit being able to use college kids' likenesses and names for things. And anyway, so the NCAA got sued, and they're going to have to reduce in order to pay these royalties back. They're going to have to reduce what they're paying to the universities in the meantime. So the university then turns around, rather than figure out how to resourcefully do something like my buddy Martinez did. Marty Martinez, he saw a need, and instead of going and asking for more money, he went out and found people that would fund it. No, we can't do that. What we have to do is just turn around and go to the legislature because they'll know we'll give it to us. That's a problem.
Well, and a lot of what they do, Ken, and you brought this up when we were talking about this the other day, that they tell the legislature that this is for matching funds. And then what they do is they take your money, tax dollars, and they go to private donors and they say, now listen, if you give us money, we'll go to the legislature and we'll get matching funds. I mean, it's a big circular argument, but all the time the university is trying to get more and more and more money from you, from taxpayers, so that they don't have to dip into their own coffers. And I mean, the numbers we're talking about here are not small. I mean, it's beyond hundreds of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. All right. This next one, this ought to be pretty interesting. $5.3 million for ADA compliance on computer systems in the state. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there already some computer programs that do that? Why are we spending $5 million to make sure that they're all ADA compliant?
I think maybe some of their computers are still using DOS.
It could be.
I don't know. Maybe Windows 95.
It might be like the federal government where they're running the entire program on the old dot matrix printers in a cave somewhere. That actually is true. It's actually an old mine. All right, and this last one here, and this is where we're going to start the interview with Josh Durrell in just a few minutes. But I want to talk about it, just the three of us, for a minute, and then that'll be the very first question for Mr. Durrell. But $5 million for the Wyoming Business Council for business research. And essentially, this is to, correct me if I'm wrong here, Ken, but this is to be sort of a business incubator. The same thing that is already happening at the University of Wyoming.
Let's let Josh answer that. But yeah, he says, we're not picking winners and losers. But if you're giving money to help businesses, um, I could say a lot, but we're almost out of time. But you go back to the argument, as you mentioned before, he's admitted, okay, this hasn't worked out. GDP has actually shrunk. So what we're doing now is we're going to help communities with infrastructure. That's not the Wyoming Business Council. We have other agencies that do that.
Yes.
So now we're replicating effort, we're duplicating effort in a frantic means to try to stay relevant.
Well, and go ahead, Mark.
Isn't that a typical government thing, is to layer on top of layer on top of layer? If you think of the Endow program that Governor Meade brought in, it was doing the same thing as Wyoming Business Council. It was kind of interesting because I was in a meeting one time and I was sitting in the back listening to their, and I leaned to the gal from the Business Council and I said, isn't this the same thing that you guys do? And she looks at me and she says, off the record? And I said, yeah. She said, yeah, they're competing with us.
Well, and my biggest problem with this is there are a ton of very wealthy people in this state that are absolutely in the business of helping out smaller businesses. Call them venture capitalists if you want, but there's so much private money that if you wanted to start a small business, and admittedly, you got to know the right people, but if you want to start a small business, there's plenty of private money to get, an operating loan or whatever. We don't have to have all of these government programs. And, this is one of the big questions that I have for Josh Durrell. And so we're going to go ahead and do that next. But let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we'll have Josh Durrell with the Wyoming Business Council. He's got some splaining to do. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics. Hunting season. Right about now, you're off with all of your pals, stalking the big gigantic elk or buck mule deer that you've been thinking about all summer long. And your lovely wife is at home, probably enjoying her time without you. But soon, my friend, all of that is going to come to a screeching halt. And I want you to think about just one little thing. She's able to park her car inside the garage because all of your hunting crap is with you right now. Now, if you'd like the marital bliss to continue, I suggest you make a call to Marcos and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They can build you a garage or a barn or any other type of metal structure for you to store all of your toys in so that your wife can continue parking inside the garage. And you can avoid sleeping on the couch for the next month or two. Call Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. Get them to build you a metal building before it's too late. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on a Tuesday. I've got former Representative Mark Jennings. I have, of course, Agent 29. And now I have Mr. Josh Durrell from the Wyoming Business Council. Josh, happy Thanksgiving. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, David, thanks for having me, and glad to be here. I'm excited to meet Mark and happy to see Ken. Thanks for everybody joining in.
Yeah, well, there's plenty that we have to talk about here. And the first question I have for you, and we were talking about it before the break, is the governor's budget. And I want to get into your survey in just a second, but we do have one question for you. In the governor's budget, there's $5 million for the Wyoming Business Council for business research. What is that?
Yeah, well, business research is really taking a look at the markets that are out there and understanding the capabilities that we have and our abilities to address those markets. I think when you take a look at the economy, you can't just do it from your desk. You've got to kind of take a more expansive view of it. And we recently brought on 2 economists and policy analysts to our team because really we need to be taking a much more broad look at it. And so when we look at research, whether it's around rare earths so that we can make sure that we're addressing the market needs there, whether it's around other exports that we might have or things that are going to influence our economy, we really feel like it's important to utilize that money to do the right analysis and planning so that we can make good decisions. And I think it's an area that we haven't focused on as much in the past. But I think it's really important for us to do that in moving into the future, just because the world is big and we need to understand it better.
Okay, so quick question. Isn't this the same thing that is happening at the University of Wyoming right now? I mean, don't they have a big division that's doing that very same type of research?
In some cases, there's research going on. A lot of their research might be slightly different than what we're trying to do. We've worked with them in the past, and we've worked in areas that they don't work in, and that's just a matter of focus. What we are finding is that what we've got to do is kind of take a look at what is Wyoming and what is the U.S. and what is the world, and then how do we make policy decisions based on that? And that's an area that we feel is probably not something we can get from the University of Wyoming today, and it's something that they're focused on, something different. So, again, don't fully understand their focus, but what I can tell you from our perspective is that we need to understand the broader economy, the Wyoming economy, the broader economy, and then be able to make policy decisions and recommendations so that we're addressing the economic decline that we face.
Okay, well, just one more question on that one, Josh. I mean, we've got the University of Wyoming. We dump hundreds of millions of dollars into that thing every single year. And I mean, there's top of the line professors, including economists there. And so, why wouldn't we just task the university with doing that exact same type of research and not funnel, that $5 million or whatever it is to another agency and then, have to pay for all those employees? Why can't we just do it all at UW?
Well, I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad question, David. I think it's a matter of focus, and it's a matter of making sure that what their research, and again, I don't know the specifics of their individual budget. I think we talk about these big dollars flying toward the university, but then we don't always break it down into the individual components. I would guess that the economics group there at the College of Business is probably working on a lot of research that's funded by private entities, by the federal government, maybe by the state. But I think that combination, again, don't fully understand the nitty gritty of it. What I can tell you is from our perspective, we've just got to take a much more broad component than we're going to get there. And I also think that it's just a matter of that we do need to do more. We can continue to slice the same pie and try to rob Peter to pay Paul, but ultimately we're going to need more information and we're going to need more analysis if we're going to make the right decisions.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Now you've got some polling out. And you're pretty excited about it. Lots of questions there. But first, why don't you just take a minute or so and tell us about the poll? Why'd you do it? What'd you find out? Just give us your take on it.
Yeah, well, I think that question of why do we do it is the key one, and I'm glad you're asking that, because I think a lot of people think, oh well, you did this to sort of prove you were right, and I don't take that approach. We actually we run into a challenge in almost every community that we work in, where people that are trying to understand their economy, they're trying to grow their economy, they will say things like this. They'll say they don't want us to grow. And so we were like, well, what do you mean by they don't want us to
And
grow?
who is
Well,
they?
exactly, you nailed it. And so we said, well, what do you mean by that? And so people would say, well, people don't want Wyoming to grow. They want Wyoming to stay exactly the same as it is, or even shrink. And say, well, okay, well, if we run into it enough, we should probably find out if that's lore or if it's real. And so we looked at it from what I would consider a scientific point of view of understanding, because frankly, I would rather work in areas that want to grow. But if the entire state doesn't want to grow, that changes our mission quite a bit. So we decided let's take a look and see what the sentiment really is. And so we did this poll for two reasons. One, to understand what people want. The other thing that we wanted to do is try to help. I think what we're also hearing from local leaders and even state leaders is that there are loud voices, and then there are silent folks, and it's really hard to deduce what's what. And so we wanted to give leaders an opportunity to understand that maybe the public that they perceive is not the public that exists, and maybe it is, but it's a way to help make better decisions for the public. Again, what we found by and large is that for the most part, people have a reasonably solid understanding of the economy, and people generally want growth and opportunities for now and into the future, which was, and then there were some surprising things, but for the most part, we frankly, we were hoping to get that response, and we did.
Okay, so a couple of questions before we get into the actual, nitty gritty of the poll. My first one would be, how many people did you survey? What were the demographics of those folks? And big one, since we're talking about money today, how much did you pay for it?
Yeah, you bet. So we paid just over $42,000 for the poll, and there were 500 likely voters, and that was conducted between September 20th and 24th of this year. We contracted with a third-party polling company called the Terrence Group, which is sort of the gold standard for polls in the state. I'm guessing that they do polls everywhere, but we looked at it. We did a couple things that I think are pretty interesting, and we looked at five specific counties, and then the rest of the state. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We looked at Albany, Campbell, Laramie, Natrona, and Sheridan counties. We did the bulk, about 60% of the respondents were from those counties. And then we took the rest of the state, and that was where 40% of the responses were from. So we did focus on the areas where there were probably the largest populations, and focus there. We don't think that this is the last bit of polling that we should do as a state or as groups, and maybe even for the Business Council to continue to understand. Again, that was sort of our take, is we need to find out where we're investing money, what is the sentiment about growth, and what can we do to make sure that we're aligned with what the public wants.
Okay, big question I always ask when I look at any poll, not just yours, but any of them,
Yep.
is did you take into account any of the political breakdown of the people that you surveyed? A lot of polls will say, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Did you take anything like that into account?
Yeah. So what we took, our demographics were that, as I mentioned, those counties. And then we looked at, and this is going to be a little bit comical because these terms are Wyoming terms.
Well, we've been talking about the budget, Josh, so there's a lot of comical stuff.
There's going to be all kinds. Oh, well, let's go back to that in a minute, because there's fun stuff there. But urban, suburban, and rural, there was a breakdown there. Of course, Wyoming urban is not national urban, but for Wyoming. broken down by age and then by sex.
Okay. Last question before we get into the results. Now, a lot of polls, well, my favorite one to beat up on is there was a poll years ago about Medicaid expansion. And you hear this from liberal legislators. Oh, the majority of people in the state are for Medicaid expansion. Well, the truth is they only polled 500 people, and their demographics were way off. And so, the results of the poll were, dubious at best. And so, I guess my first thing would be 500. That seems to be a pretty low number. And I don't know that is necessarily representative of the entire state. I mean, do you have a different view of that?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that you always look at is statistical significance. And especially for those counties that I mentioned, we have statistical significance there. However, I'm with you, David, on this. We look at these as entry points and a basic understanding. Like to say that this is 100% fact or gospel is like, this is not okay. What we're trying to do is try to understand the general sentiment and then understand how do we dive a little bit deeper into that, and how do we just, frankly, more than anything, with all of these sort of like what I might call cultural norms, we have this idea in our head that nobody wants growth, and those words are powerful. And so what I think we're trying to do more than anything, because there are a lot of myths out there about Wyoming, I think what we're trying to do more than anything is get people to think critically and understand that there might be deeper information to take into account, and that knee-jerk reaction you have may not represent reality. And I think that more than anything, that's really where the path we're trying to help people with, is to take a little deeper look at what they assume is their first response. Because generally speaking, that's for the complex problem that we're solving, that first response is likely not going to help.
All right. Ken's got a question for you.
Hi, Josh.
How you doing, sir?
All right, thank you. This may sound like a little bit out there, but I think it's a bigger issue than a lot of people might realize. The timing of this poll, the end of September, most of the people that I know, and I realize that's just incidental, but their focus is elsewhere. They're out trying to fill the freezer. They're chasing animals around in the field. And those are the people who would say, Wyoming is too full. Now, there was an article that came out here just recently that talked about Utah is expected to have all kinds of growth. And if you look through the comments of that, again, it's just anecdotal. When you look through the comments of that, it's fine. Leave them in Utah. We don't want that here. And I count myself among that. I worked out of Colorado Springs for quite a while, and I saw the massive growth that went there. We do not want that here.
Yeah.
What do you think, Josh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first on your timing thing, that is the thing, is this is a snapshot in time. I myself was out chasing antelope, not at that exact time. We didn't harvest until later in October.
Why would you want to eat one of those things?
Let me tell you something. I think it's the lobster of the plains. I agree with the meat
I
eater on
knew
this
there
one.
was something wrong with you, man.
And anyway, plus it is just a darn fun hunt every time. So anyway, so I hear you on that, and I think it leaves space for more things and more analysis on timing. I do happen to know that, speaking of budgets, we'll be talking about a budget here, in about a little over a week.
Yeah,
Representative Pendergraft. So we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that. I think you have different ideas on my budget than I do.
I would guarantee it.
And yeah, well, that'll be fun. And but the other part of it is that this idea that we will magically overnight turn into Utah or Colorado it's kind of a leap. That's a long leap. So I want you to think about this for a second. The city of Albuquerque, New Mexico has more people than Wyoming. And so imagine if we grew by 50%, or if we doubled, okay, not grew by 50%, but grew by 100%, and double, we would still be as sparsely populated as North Dakota.
Alaska,
Now,
here
I
I
don't,
come.
yeah, exactly. Well, and so that I think that's a really interesting dynamic, um, because one of the things that I think Wyoming has is we still have opportunity to get away from people. If you think about our population centers, and we were to take, let's just take Cheyenne and Casper as our two major population centers in the state. Most of the growth is going to go there, just because economically from an agglomeration standpoint, people like to be around people. Well, those people like to be around people, and then people that say, "Hey, Cheyenne is too big now," they might find themselves in Pine Bluffs or Wheatland, and so we actually see that Wyoming's still a place where you can have the best of both worlds. I think there's still plenty of places. Heck, but joke around here is there are plenty of places in Albany County and Carbon County that I haven't seen yet, and those are the two places I've lived in my life. So I think there's still a lot of space. And I think the idea of comparing us to incredibly big population centers like Utah and Colorado, it's a leap too far.
Okay, fair enough. Former Representative Jennings has a question for you.
Yeah, Josh,
Yes, sir.
when I hear you talking there, I have a question there. I hear you say this is a complex problem
Mhm.
that we're trying to solve. And so I'd like you to touch on that a little more. What exactly is it you're trying to solve? And then I want to make a little bit of a statement here also at the same time, in the correspondence to what Ken was saying. When I think about people, I don't know that everybody is that I know of is when they're making that statement, they're making it that the numbers. They're talking more about the values. They don't want to see what Wyoming was be turned into
Yeah.
some other state's values. I get that, but how's that your problem? I mean, as a government entity,
Mhm.
how do you a complex issue? Why is it a complex issue for government? Shouldn't free market make a decision on whether they want to come to Wyoming or not? Shouldn't free market be the one to? I mean, I'm not quite sure I understand your study or your survey.
Sure.
What is the problem that you as government can solve out here into the industry? The industry's doing all this research. If it's profitable, they'll come. They will
Yeah.
be here. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious of what you're trying to solve there.
You
What does
bet.
that look like from your standpoint, from government's point of view?
All right, Josh.
Yeah. Yeah. Great questions. I'm going to break it down into both, if you don't mind. First of all, on the culture piece, I think you're right. I think that's what people are saying is they're saying, hey, we don't want to, change the Wyoming culture with all these quote unquote outsiders. And so I have a couple things to consider there is that our population today is about 42% people who are born in Wyoming. And the other nearly 60%, 57.8% or 4% or whatever it is made up of people from other states. And what I would say is that that's a fact. Those are just where people are born and how they get here. But I believe the Wyoming culture is stronger than that, and I believe that people are actually coming here because of the culture and want to be part of our culture, not trying to change it into theirs. And I think the people that come and try to change it into theirs they're going to find a tough row to hoe because our culture is strong, and I think our culture is stronger than 580,000 people. I think it could actually support more. I think the risk that we have is that by with economic decline and this is happening all over the nation. With economic decline, you're going to see population decline in areas that are going to propagate our culture. And so what I'm saying is our culture is actually at more risk if we get smaller. I believe our culture is strong enough and can accept the growth and really kind of make it stronger by growing. So I think we have that is an alternative perspective to our culture and how growth could actually positively impact it. But the other part of it, and I think you have laid out something that's super, super important. And that's this idea of,
How
and
Josh, not to interrupt you there,
yeah,
but how
sorry, go
is that
ahead. Yeah.
Josh's? How is that
Yeah.
government's How's
Yep.
that government's business at all?
I'm about to touch on that,
Okay, I'm sorry.
and I think no worries, no worries. I think that your question in two parts of that culture thing. I believe our culture is stronger than that, and then two, why it's a problem for the state agency that cares about economic growth and opportunities for Wyomingites is because if we don't reverse our economic decline, and I say we, and I do mean government intervention. And before you get the hives or break out in a rash when I say that, and I totally get it. Before you do that, realize that there is a challenge that is happening all across America, and it's happening to rural towns, and we are rural. In fact, we are so rural that we experience this problem to a greater extent than any other state. Maybe not Alaska, but maybe. And the issue is that when you have a small population like we have, and it's not growing in a workforce, which it is not, our workforce is flat, then what you have is businesses have a hard time expanding, or they have a hard time starting here because the workforce isn't available.
Okay.
And so as businesses shrink, no, David, this is super important.
Okay.
If there is a vicious cycle occurring in all of rural America, and that is less jobs means less people, which means less jobs, which means less people, and that's a downward spiral. Whereas in cities where the bulk of our population, 60% of the people born here actually end up in places like Denver, those are a virtuous cycle of more jobs and more people. And so that spirals up and we're spiraling down. The free market is actually not free, but you have to remember those markets are working.
Okay.
The market is working against us. So we have to use government intervention to actually reverse that. I know all of you are probably going to have to take some Benadryl because that sounds like an allergic reaction waiting to happen.
So let me give you an example, Josh.
Yeah.
My wife, we built a salon for her. And in Sheridan, there are, last time I checked, and it's been over a year ago, but there are 67 salons in Sheridan. Now that counts people that work out of their home as well as people that have storefronts. And it's, what we found is the difficulty in opening a small business, any business, was not that there weren't people to work there. And again, I get it. We're kind of talking about a specialized workforce there. Not everybody is a hairstylist. But we found that the difficulty was government, that it wasn't like people applying to work there. It wasn't that we didn't have the space to employ somebody, but it was that we had too many regulations that prevented the government, the business from opening. And just real quick, it took me over a month and a pretty stern talking to the city council to get the permits approved to open the business. And so now I want to get into and I'm flabbergasted that you might say that the free market doesn't work, because I think that Wyoming is a perfect example of where it actually does work. That there are so many businesses that just because of a favorable tax environment, a nice place to live, that have moved to this state. And there's a big one just north of town. It's called Weatherby. And I mean, and you go up to that business park, which, by the way, that business park is probably one of the only ones that's actually worked in Wyoming. We talked about that last time you were on the show.
How did that business park get funded? And how did Weatherby get funded?
Okay.
How did that happen? So before we go on, David, you're talking about both sides of the free market as if they were not connected. I really strongly believe, now this is where the antidote to all the hives that I gave you earlier might come in. I agree 100% that we are overregulated. In fact, I think what we say we're free market, and we want to believe that. But if you look at the regulatory environment at our local level, it's oppressive. It's oppressive in housing. It's oppressive in business. It is oppressive. And I think we've got to really look at that. So we're actually taking a look at both, because we definitely believe that a lower regulatory environment, or an appropriate regulatory environment, is key to business growth. And so you're 100% correct. Like we've got to take a look at that. In fact, we're working with a number of communities right now, the ones that will take the political heat to make those changes. we're working with them now to get rid of regulations that just don't matter to us.
Yeah, and one more comment, and then I really do want to get to the results of your survey. Let me ask you a question. Like, how much time do
Yeah.
you have, Josh?
I've got as much as y'all want.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's some interesting stuff that came out
Mhm.
in your poll, and I want to give you a chance to talk about those.
Sure.
Where the Benadryl quick kicks in.
Mark says we have to do this quickly before the Benadryl happens. So, isn't the argument that you just made, though, that we need less government and not more? That if we get government out of the way, that maybe
Yeah.
business will prosper? I mean, isn't that essentially
Yeah.
the argument you just made?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because here you're right, David. So, and this is the thing where I think a lot of people assume that when you work for a government agency that you just want more and more and you just want to be bigger and bigger. And what we want to do is be the appropriate amount. And we think that there is probably too much in some areas and there is not enough in others. And I think the appropriate part is, going back to medication, you don't just hit somebody with 10,000 milligrams of
Benadryl.
ibuprofen or Benadryl for sure. You administer those in the right amounts for the right problem. And I think what we have is a significant problem in regulation, and we need to address that. And we're working on that with communities that will work on that.
I think,
And we also have a challenge with funding or a fiscal system that doesn't allow for communities to pay for their own growth. And so I think what we have is we've sort of said, okay, this is government, this is how big it should be. And what it needs to be is smaller over here and probably bigger over here so that it addresses the Wyoming problem, not the problem that other people have. And I think that's where we probably will agree and disagree at the same time, because again, it's not a simple problem.
I think you're right when you say we want the appropriate amount. We want the same, an appropriate amount. I think the difference is in what we consider appropriate, what we consider the appropriate role of government. And we're probably not ever going to agree on that right away.
All right, Josh. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to hit your poll results because it's a pretty broad discussion, I think, and there's a number of things that you and I are probably going to disagree on. So, try to take a break first. So, stick with me. We'll be right back.
Let's do it. Thanks.
Yeah, I know. The weather seems to be toying with us. 60 one day, 42 the next, and pretty soon, my friends, those 6s and 4s are going to turn into 3s and 2s. Though we all want to avoid it, that white stuff is coming, my friends, and you will be shoveling the walk in it. It's cold, it's unpleasant, and nobody likes to do it. But you could make it just a little bit more comfortable and prevent your feet from turning into a giant block of ice. In fact, you could keep them nice and warm and toasty, and your toes will never even know that they're outside. The rest of you may be frozen solid, but at least your feet won't be. To make all this happen, you just need a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Are you one of those guys that listen to the president just a little bit too closely and now you're tired of winning? Are you getting the feeling that there's been way too many good things happening in our country and you just can't take it anymore? Well, if you are, and you think you should follow Rosie O'Donnell's example and get the heck out of Dodge, you need to call Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She'll make those foreign country living ideas a reality for you. All you have to do is call 307-699-3519, and she'll make sure some freedom-loving, red-blooded American will now live in the home that you no longer want. If you want to sell your house, or if you want to buy one that's way better than the house you have right now, give Rebecca a call. Again, her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
That's right, my friends. I have my roll of duct tape in case Mr. Josh Durrell makes my head explode again. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined today by Mr. Josh Durrell from the Wyoming Business Council, Representative Mark Jennings, former Representative Mark Jennings, and, of course, Agent 29. Welcome back to the show. Josh, let's talk about your survey. You notice I do have a roll of duct tape, just in case,
Yeah.
my friend.
Gosh, I wish I would have thought about that. I'd have brought my own duct tape, but that's okay. You
All
know
right.
what they say, if you can't duck it.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, it's my program. I guess we could say that. Anyway,
Nah,
so let's talk about your survey. Just real quick, take a minute or so, and just kind of tell me what you found.
Well, so again, our goal was to just understand the sentiment around growth, because we always hear about how we don't want to grow. And so what we found is that that people by and large are actually okay with population growth and opportunity growth, economic growth, even when there are those challenges that growth brings about to Wyomingites. And then we took a look at who should be involved in that growth. What should that growth be focused on in terms of, is that for new businesses? Is it supporting local existing businesses? Is it about investment? And then we also took a look at the tax word and asked people if they would be willing to spend a little bit more in taxes in order to get opportunities for their friends and family.
Okay, now when it comes to surveys, like I told you before, I'm usually pretty critical of them because I think a lot of times we throw out numbers that survey says, it's like the Family Feud or whatever. And we tend to just think, well, there's the answer that we were looking for. And I'm going to put up on the screen. Of course, you won't be able to see it, but I've got some of your survey results. And one of the first questions is, which of the following would you say most closely describes your view of the economy here in Wyoming? And you've got a number of options. And the first one is strong and growing, and then in a recovery, and then growing but not enough, slightly on the downside, approaching recession, or recession. Now, again, I think that how you ask a question is at least as important, perhaps more important than the answer itself. So, question for you, Josh. Only one of those options would allow people to say, hey, I think things are good. There's only one. And then the other, 4 or 5 options would indicate that, the economy is doing bad. I mean, don't you see that question as a little bit lopsided?
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. So, I mean, if you look at it from a trajectory or a slope of the line perspective, growing but not enough would be a positive, but just not fast. In a recovery means that we're coming out of something, so that's a positive, and strong and growing. So from my perspective, and just from a math perspective, all those would represent positive slopes in the line, whereas slightly downside, approaching recession or recession, would indicate a negative slope in that. So that's the way I would look at it, but I definitely see what you're saying.
Well, my problem with it, Josh, is that when you call somebody on the phone and they actually agree to take your survey, chances are you're not talking to somebody that has a background in statistics, right? They're not going to listen to the question and say, well, I guess maybe you could take it this way. They're just going to answer it, right?
Sure.
And so the perception of your question matters a great deal. Let me put up another one here, and we'll go to question. I guess they're not numbered, but this one says, which of the following would you say most closely describes your view of the economy in your local town? And again, you've got the same options. Now, my question here is a little bit different because you're talking with people that, they live in a community for a reason. They perhaps raised their family or they chose to live there. So theoretically, people would have a pretty favorable view of where they live. But again, you have the same options: strong and growing, or in a recovery, or and again, this one too looks to be a little bit lopsided. But what's interesting here is the results. You've got strong and growing 23%, growing but not enough 26, slightly on the downside 26. So really, this question appears to be kind of a toss-up.
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, and the other part of this, David, I think you're bringing up a really good question: is how do we take this? And I mean, we're a continuous improvement type of place. We don't think of it as like this is now the answer to all answers. This is a start in the process and a start in the conversation. So I like the, like, we'll take that back to the polling company and say, okay, hey, this is a question that we need to understand better, and how do we ask this in a way that might be different so we can kind of compare. I think that's a fantastic approach.
A lot of surveys.
Also by the if you don't mind, just so that we are in lockstep,
sure.
There is a small little faint hue and a number down in the bottom right of each of those slides, and then that'll kind of make sure that we're in sync as I scroll through this as well.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Oh yeah, there it is. All right. So let's go to the next one here. And this one is on, it says, which of the following would you say most closely describes your view of the economy in your local town? And, again, this is one that I probably have the most heartburn with, is that you have all of the counties that you surveyed. And then one option is strong, which is a positive, right? If you think everything's going good in your community, like I mentioned my wife's salon. I think things are moving pretty solid there, that it's pretty strong. And then the other three options: stagnant, downside, recession. Stagnant is a word that has a negative connotation to it. Downside, obviously. Recession, even worse. So again, how is this question fair?
Maybe it's not. I'm not saying I'm a statistical or a survey expert by any means, but I think what you're saying is it's potentially, there's one positive and a bunch of negatives. I think that like what you could do though is take a look at that and say, okay, how many people thought it was strong and growing?
Well, let's look at it real quick. I'm going to put it back on the screen. Well, the biggest one is Sheridan County. Of course it is, 45%. But the rest of them, I mean, the results are actually kind of split when you look at the respondents. But go ahead, Ken.
I think part of what's telling is there's not only one answer, but it's aggressive. It's really strong and growing, or it's failing. So there's a polarity there too. There's not one that says growing a little bit or mildly growing or growing just enough to keep people out.
Yeah.
Well, and Josh, I think that you and I are actually agree on this point, that I am not one of those people that thinks that we need to, keep Wyoming exactly the same. I think that kind of smacks of a little bit of stagnation. I'm one of those people that I think if you have, the right values, and of course, I'm a conservative, so it's of course conservative values. But if you want to move here and you want to raise your family, you want to contribute to your community, I'm all in favor of that. Now, where I have heartburn is where, folks move from perhaps more, let's just say, either left coast, and they keep voting the same way. And that my problem is politics. It's not necessarily business. But what that translates into is more government, right? You vote for more regulations. You vote for people that are in favor of higher taxes and that sort of thing. So I think at least you and I agree on that.
Yeah. Hey, so let me ask you, because I probably don't know as much about politics as I should.
Well, as Alan Simpson said, Josh, in Wyoming, everything is politics. Except for politics.
Except for politics. So how do you think how do you think that left-leaning policies fare in Wyoming?
Surprisingly, the recent history of Wyoming is they fare pretty well, because it is an absolute fallacy that because 73% of the state votes for Trump, that corresponds to a conservative legislature,
I
but it
wouldn't
doesn't.
qualify it by saying recently either. You look at the very founding. The founding was quite progressive, and you look at most of what the legislature has done. It has been what I would call a left leaning. Of course, from where I sit, probably everything's left leaning but Mark.
Except for where I'm at, always to the right.
Oh, are you guys going to fight over who's the farthest right?
We do that.
Let's see. So who is the farthest right?
The problem is that I'm working with two liberals.
So yeah, we just have a
a
really interesting spectrum, right?
I have a qualifier in here to prove the progressive point of view is you have a job, a governmental job. That would be seen by many as the progressive agenda is truly alive and well in Wyoming. And not against you personally, I'm on your personal quote side there, but that's something that many people would look at. I actually heard you say something there in the very beginning that I would challenge you to look at just a little, and that is that in talking to the people or surveys that they're willing to spend a little more in taxes. People don't spend money in taxes. That's called legalized wealth still being stolen from them by the government.
Coolidge called it legalized larceny.
And so you gotta be careful. I mean, you can say it, but even that statement that people are willing to spend more in taxes, that's a progressive idea. Their wallets are opened up and handing more money over. Many times they don't even know it.
Well, and I think, Josh, a question for you. Or go ahead and respond to Representative Jennings.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, spin it out for me a little bit. Let's just say for a minute, we said, okay, look, free market is. Let's go. There's no government left. Let it rock. What does that look like?
I did not say no government. You use
so
the term
just like
properly of the appropriate size.
Absolutely. So we agree on appropriate size.
There is, well, we might not agree on what that number is, but yes, that is, and all you have to do is look around and see so many cases of government interference into people's life. The less government, the more freedom is available. Now, if you take that to a place of our libertarian friends, absolutely, anarchy would reign, and none of us feel that way. We feel like there is a proper role for government, but it's much, much smaller than what we see out there today. It is not what we have continued to progressively grow. And I use your job as an example. How long has the Wyoming Business Council been around?
About 26 years.
And what did we do before that?
That's a good question.
There's an interesting piece.
Let me ask you that though. Let me ask you this. So you guys brought up the high-tech business park as maybe one of the ones that are successful, and you brought up
one of the only ones.
Brought up Weatherby. What help me with that? So where would that have happened? I'll just let you know that
private money
would no way that Weatherby would be there.
Private money would have funded
without
that.
State intervention.
I don't think that that's true, Josh.
Yeah.
And here's why. Because you have a number of states, and the one that Weatherby moved from, California, they are arguably, and probably next to Chicago, next to Illinois, but arguably one of the most regulated states in the country. They are also one of the states that has the highest taxes. And when Weatherby announced that they were moving out of California, their stated reason was regulations and taxes. And that they're a firearm company, and California is not exactly firearm friendly. And so I think that absent government intervention, I see no reason whatsoever why they wouldn't have moved to Wyoming. And I mean, maybe it took some cajoling by some public officials to say, hey, you guys may need to look at, some of our regulations and some of our taxes. But I see no reason whatsoever why that company wouldn't have moved here absent, any sort of regulation. Now, other states,
Do you think
hold on
that
just a
no other
second.
states were playing?
Oh, absolutely they were. Okay, so what I'm saying here is that if you get government out of the way, and by that I mean stop being involved in private business, there would be no reason why they wouldn't have moved here. And so when government says, "Hey, we're going to give you a tax break if you move here," it means you're taxing too much. If it says we're going to, if government says we're going to reduce the amount of regulations that we have so that you can bring your business here, it means that you're regulating too much. And so I would absolutely argue that absent government intervention, I don't know if there was tax breaks or whatever. I would hope not.
There was.
Okay, Mark says there were.
There was incentives. We'll call it that.
Okay, I'm against that, by the way. I think that that's picking winners and losers. But anyway, get government out of the way, and I see no reason why they wouldn't have.
So you think you have the sphere of influence to change the way Idaho behaves? You do not. Like that's the thing. Is like what you're talking about is saying, okay, well, Wyoming's not going to play that game, and we're going to let it be just free and easy. But the problem is that we're playing a game with other competitors. We're not just competing with ourselves. We're competing with Idaho and Montana. And Idaho and Montana, they're playing a game, South Dakota, they're playing a game with the full arsenal of tools. And what you're saying is let's take some tools away from Wyoming, which is fine.
No.
Like we can
No,
play
that's not
that
what I'm
game.
saying at all.
But Weatherby would not come here. You should see if Adam will come on the podcast and
I'm sure
tell
he
you. Yeah, you should talk to him.
But I think my point here, or I know my point here, is that it's not a matter of tools in the toolbox, right? If you create a tax environment, property tax environment that is favorable to business, that is, we tax only as much as is necessary. There's no reason why that wouldn't happen. But the problem is we don't do that because we do have a property tax environment that I would argue is pretty cumbersome to private individuals and to businesses. And by the way, we just passed that constitutional amendment that, thank God, conservatives are in control, or they'd be monkeying with that. But my argument is that you don't just focus on the singular case of one business moving here. You have to look at the whole thing. And again, on the last time you were on the program, we discussed how the GDP of Wyoming has gone down, in the 20 some odd years that the Business Council has been around.
Yeah.
All right. So to me, that says the answer lies elsewhere, that it does not lie with another government bureaucracy that, purport is the wrong word, that its goal is to increase business. The real answer is reduce regulation, reduce taxes, and get government out of the free market. That's my argument.
Hey, Josh, I'd like to interject.
Yeah.
I'd like
Yeah,
to
you
interject
bet.
a second part into that also,
Mhm.
because when you're
Yeah.
looking at this picture of that you were talking about earlier about how's the economy doing here, and we were talking about, do people really not want the numbers, or do they not want the values to change? When we're talking about, and listen, I like Adam Weatherby. I've had numerous conversations, and good man.
Yeah, I like him.
It's not that.
Absolutely.
But if you're looking at changing the values of how people, I would rather have people who came here because they wanted to come here, not because they were subsidized to come here. And so I would love to think that Weatherby would have come anyway. And I know I was in the middle of that time frame. And I get that we're competing against those other states. But part of that value that we're talking about losing is lost in subsidizing or bribing other, bribing's a harsh word there, but that's the kind of thing that it does. We're doing it on the backs of other taxpayers. And by giving incentives and subsidies to people to come here. Those are the people that, they need to look long and hard. Do I want to live in Wyoming? Do I want to prosper my business there? And will I do it without government assistance? And so And the other part that I would throw in there also is even if you use Sheridan as the shining example on the hill, how about you go around to all the other industrial parks where we're cutting hay?
Yeah.
We're literally
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
successful.
There are examples of that for
Yeah.
sure. Here's the there's ideology and there's economics, and reality is somewhere in the middle of that. And I see what you're saying about the idea and the ideals of a free market system, and I respect those. I think from an economic point of view, if we can lower regulation, we already have like one of the lowest, if not the lowest, taxing environments in the United States. We have run that experiment really, really hard. So the findings of that experiment, maybe people don't love, but the reality is that's an experiment that we've run. We have plenty of data to suggest that that's not the only thing that matters. Regulations do, absolutely. The challenge we have is that the data suggests that by and large, people leave this state more than any other place. And that's because of opportunity. And I think that that's the thing. I'm not saying that that you don't have a perspective. You have a very clear perspective, and I respect it and appreciate it. But what I have to look at, and what my job is, and whether that's the progressive agenda, or if it's trying to make sure that opportunities exist for Wyomingites that are born here, I think that it's really clear that when your wages are dropping, your workforce is stagnant, and 60% of people that are born in Wyoming leave to go somewhere else, and that's more than anywhere else in the nation. That's not a Wyoming that I like. That's not a Wyoming that makes me feel good as a parent. That's not a Wyoming that says there's an abundance of opportunities. That says to me that there's something wrong. And so when we look at it, while I love Wyoming, I've worked my tail off and sacrificed to stay here my entire life. I was born in Missouri. I came here when I was 8
I knew
months,
there was
and
something wrong with you. No, I'm just kidding.
neither state claims me, right? Like neither state claims me. I get it, but but to do that and then to ignore reality is probably just it's not setting us up for success in the future. And I think that's just my perspective. So you have a very clear and
Yeah.
well articulated perspective, and mine is more is sort of like I get what you're saying. However, the data suggests that it's not working the way you want it to.
But you came here. Yeah, but you came here. I came here.
My parents came here to escape poverty in a small farming town in Missouri to work in the coal mines in Carbon County, of which there are no more. And so that extraction industry has been a tremendous thing for Wyoming. And it's kind of fun to be able to work in a place where I might be able to help kids like me not have to deal with like 1983 and 84 when my dad was laid off from the mines for 3 or 4 years and worked construction. It might be a good thing for me to not have to make a sacrifice or change when I got that mechanical engineering degree, because I loved Wyoming, but the opportunities were all elsewhere. And so that's what I'm excited about, is that I get to play in a world where I might change that.
I get that. I get that, Josh. And your job is to bring businesses here, and to the degree that you're successful, I think that that's great. I think the argument that you and I have is the involvement in government, and I think that a reliance on what we call data has to be scrutinized, pretty harshly. And there's a poll is a poll is a poll, and you can what they say about statistics, but you have to examine what the poll is telling you. And I think what your poll is telling us is we need more polling, and that we need to that we need to work on the questions a little bit and maybe drill down on what the results are telling us. Well, Josh, I appreciate you taking the time, and you're a good sport, and we kind of beat up on you a little bit this morning, but thank you.
You know what, David and Representative Pendergraft and Mark, I love talking with folks who have a different view than I do, because my view isn't 100% correct either. And so I think if we can keep talking, I'm happy to do it. So I would love to be on. As you could tell, we spent way longer than we thought we would.
Way longer.
And I could keep talking with all you for forever. So just invite me back anytime, please.
You bet.
And Representative Pendergraft, I guess I'll see you in a little over a week.
Josh, I'd like to make it clear. I think you have value in your job. I just think it ought to be paid for by private sector.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
All right, Josh. Thank you very much, and we'll be talking later.
Sounds good. Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
So that was Mr. Josh Durrell on from the Wyoming Business Council. And wow, that discussion lasted a little bit longer than any of us thought. So reaction? We got a few minutes left in the show.
Somebody out there in the private sector offer him a job.
That's actually come up in our conversations back and forth. What you do is a valuable thing, but who the agent is, I just go back to if government is the problem, sound like Reagan, more government's not going to fix it.
Well, that, and it really is, between Josh and the three of us, it really is a question of perspective. And he said it's not ideology, but I really think that it is, because he seems to think that the free market is not really working. And the three of us would say, well, I don't think we're giving the free market a chance because we've got too much government.
In my 10 years, this was one of the struggling things that I had, because Josh makes a very valid point in that these other states are offering enticing things to these people. And it was always a difficult thing, rolling stock for trains. Do we give them a tax break? And basically when we did, they came to Wyoming, and when we didn't, they left. And so I get it. But again, back to that deal of it is an ideology. If it's just because all 49 other states are doing it, if they all jump off the side of the cliff from our youth, do we go too? And so I think we should be the shining example of not doing that.
I think part of the argument comes down to I think part of the argument comes down to we're comparing apples to apples right now, but if we had things set up the way that the three of us would have
how
it,
things
where
would be
government is actually the appropriate size, now it's going to be comparing apples to oranges, and people are going to pick us every time.
Well, I want to go back.
But Josh's point is, well, that's unrealistic. You can't get there. Okay, so we just muddle in mediocrity forever, and
Well, to be fair, I don't think that's his argument about mediocrity, but I see what you're saying, Ken. But to finish this out, I want to go back to our budget discussion. And I don't know that we really hit this nail on the head. But if we spend, a third of our spending comes from the interest of our sovereign wealth fund and our investments. Well, if we reduce the size of government another 2/3, which we can absolutely do in my mind, maybe 2/3 is too big of a number, but if you reduce the size of government and all of these agencies, some of which are duplicative, that we wouldn't really have to tax nearly as much as we do, and we wouldn't have the government agencies that we do.
Just going back to what is the proper role of government?
Yes, that is always the question.
Get it out of healthcare, get it out of et cetera, and focus on what you have to do and do that well.
Yeah. All right. Well, that pretty much burns up our busy broadcast 2 hours on the program. Thank you once again to Josh Durrell for being a good sport and coming on the program. There's not everybody in government that's willing to sit down and actually debate their own the virtues of their own job. And I appreciate that he's willing to come on the program anytime. Thank you, Representative Jennings. You're welcome back anytime you like.
I appreciate it. It's always such an honor to get to come and talk with you guys.
Well, thank you very much. Well, that'll do it for today's installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. We'll be back tomorrow for my Thanksgiving special. I am excited every year that I get to do this, and so we'll do that tomorrow. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow, my friends.